Over the last couple of years, I've been flipping houses, and I've been able to accumulate some knowledge and experience, as well as plenty mistakes that I've learned along the way. So in this video, I want to share with you the exact process on how to flip a house if you're a complete beginner, because I know it can seem very overwhelming. There's so much information out there and all the different steps are involved into flipping a house. And on top of all that, I also want to save you the time, the money, the headaches, the stress, and the different ways that you can actually go about flipping houses in the most convenient way to also make it enjoyable, but also make profit along the way. So that is my complete goal in this video, to make sure that you get the most value out of this. So let's get right into it. The first step is gonna be finding the deal. Now, most people get really stuck on this part. You don't have to knock it out the park on your first deal, the one that is gonna make you $100,000, $200,000 of profit. That's not the way it works. Maybe it is on your first deal, you never know. But the whole point of your first deal is to just get your foot in the door. Of course, you don't want to lose money, but if you're constantly waiting for that perfect deal, you're gonna wait an entire lifetime. That said, I also want to make sure that you are very patient with this, because there will be many deals that you will have to pass up on. There's gonna be deals and properties that come across your table that might seem like a deal at first glance, but when you look at the timeline and maybe even the work that is required to get it done and completed, it might not make sense afterwards. So just remember to be patient and don't just pull a trigger on just anything. Run your numbers and make sure it makes sense. So how in the world do you find your first deal? There's two main ways here. The first one is off market. The second one is on market, meaning off market deals is properties that are not listed on Zillow or on the MLS or Redfin or realtor.com or any of the platforms online. On market means it's on the MLS and it's public data available to anybody. Anybody can see it on Zillow and all those platforms. Oftentimes, the way you get access to the properties on the MLS is through realtors. They might even have some that are coming soon, which you can actually get access to if you have connections with those realtors. With the off market properties, that is when you personally go out and try to find motivated sellers, whether it's through cold calling them, door knocking, sending them mailers, texting them. There's different ways to go about this. So those are the two most common ways to find properties that you can flip. Now, there's also the big question of local versus out-of-state flipping. Here's my take on this. Specifically for people who are living in the higher end markets, for example, in California, it's very expensive. So most people would say it's better to invest out of state because it's much cheaper. You can get properties for $50,000, $100,000. And while yes, that's gonna be true, there's a couple things that you have to take into account. The first one being the location. Are you even familiar with the area that you're investing in? If you are, that's great. But then also, are you gonna be the one personally going out there and managing the project? Or do you have people out there, boots on ground? Maybe it's a local realtor, a local investor, a partner that you might partner up with to give you information as the project progresses. So I'm not saying you can't invest out of state, you definitely can, but make sure you know the local market and you have somebody that's boots on ground that can give you basically information about the property that you're investing in and can also give you live feedback as you go through the project. Now compare that to local investing in your area, such as California, an expensive market. Yes, the downside is that it's more expensive. However, there's also different ways to go about that, as far as finding maybe a partner that can partner up with you on a deal to cover those expenses. But the biggest and greatest benefit to investing locally is that you know the local market, especially if it's an area that you have lived in personally or you know very well. This is extremely helpful when it comes to not only finding the deal, but then also when it comes time to selling, because you know your exact ideal buyer for the property that you're flipping, which is crucial when it comes to flipping houses. So make sure you know the local market. Another thing you want to look out for when it comes to researching properties is the condition of the house, which is probably the most important. There's different ways to go about this, because you can either do cosmetic fixer-uppers, you can do complete fixer-uppers, or complete teardowns. I guess these are the three most common types of house flips that you can do, with cosmetic being the lightest one. You know, just putting in flooring, paint, maybe some windows, a kitchen remodel, a bathroom remodel, very basic stuff. When you're going into a full rehab, maybe you're tearing down some walls, changing out the layout, maybe the structure of the house, adding bedrooms and bathrooms, and then a complete teardown, you're changing up the entire place completely. When you're starting off, personally, I would recommend to start off with the cosmetic fixer-uppers, because it definitely gives you an idea of what goes on in a house flip, and then you can eventually gradually increase the amount of work you can do on projects. Another thing for me is that I personally try to stay away from any major problems such as foundation and any structural problems. If it needs other major upgrades like a roof or a new HVAC, that's completely fine, because then I'll just build that into my numbers. So once you've identified kind of what you're actually looking for in a property, over time you start to create this criteria buy box. And this is something that you'll consistently go back to when it comes to researching properties. You know exactly what you want. You just basically have to check out the boxes. In my case, my criteria, my buy box is very simple. I normally try to look at properties that are 2 bedrooms or higher, at least 1 bathroom or more, and the ideal scenario is a 3 bedroom, 2 bath. And the reason for that is because in my local market, I understand that the buyers are normally families, larger families. So when they move into the home, they might need 2 bathrooms because it becomes a lot easier for them. If 1 bathroom is being used, they have an additional one. And some people don't like to think about this stuff, but it's real. You're not just flipping a house just to flip it. You also have to think about the end buyer. Who's gonna actually live in this place? And when you think from that perspective, it makes the whole flipping process a lot simpler and easier for you to do. Next, we go on to building the team. This is something that anybody can do, I promise. And you don't need a team of more than 10 people. You are the one that is the centerpiece of all of this. In this team, you want to have a great contractor. And in most cases, this contractor is going to have a team of people that do the work. When I first started out, I wanted to hire a person for electricity, plumbing, a roofer, kitchen specialist. The problem with this is that you start having to manage every single person in their timelines. And it just becomes a whole stress party to have to manage those people. As someone who likes to keep things very simple, I realized that if I just hire one contractor and they have a team of people that do all the work, now I just have to manage just one person, that contractor, and they know exactly what that timeline is. So now I just communicate with them and they report back to me with any feedback. So your contractor is one of those very important people on your team. The second person is going to be a lender. Now this can be either a bank or local lender that can provide you financing to buy the house. And usually there's going to be some requirements in order to obtain that financing. And the requirements are actually not that crazy. They do require a minimum credit score as well as some money in the bank just to be safe on their side that you actually have the funds for a down payment. And the most common type of loan that most real estate investors use, at least for house flipping, is a hard money loan. In most cases, the down payment that they require is anywhere from 10 to 25%. And if you're not using a bank or local lender, also the option to use a private money investor, which basically means it can be a family member or a friend that can lend you the money, maybe for a percentage of the profit or interest back on their money, or you can actually do a combination of both a private money investor along with a bank or lender for the hard money loan. And the way you do this is that the private money investor will cover the down payment and the bank or lender will cover the remainder. And in some cases, you might actually have to put zero out of your own pocket if you can work out that deal, and for your money investment partners. But the reality is, in most cases, they also want you to put in some money to show that you have some skin in the game, of course. Those two individuals, your contractor and your lender, are the most important on your team. One of the first things you want to do with the contractor is, of course, walk the property and get an estimate of what it's going to cost you to rehab this entire place, and have them give you a detailed breakdown of, the kitchen rehab, the bathroom rehab, and any other work that you're going to do to the property. The more detailed numbers you have, the better you can run your numbers on your end to see if it even makes sense to flip this property. In the beginning, you probably want to get different bids from different contractors just to see which can actually make sense in your case, not only for your numbers, but who actually does the better type of work at a really good price. During this process, you also want to ask the contractor questions. Things like, how do they operate? How do they work? Do they work during the weekdays only? On weekends? You want to make sure you set those expectations up front instead of saving it once you're already in the project. And that's where problems can actually come about if you don't set those expectations up front. The contractor, the lender, the financing, and you have all the numbers, both from the lender as well as the contractor. Now it's time to actually run the numbers and see if the property is actually a great deal, which is the third thing, actually running the numbers. The beautiful thing about investing in real estate is that it all comes down to the numbers. The numbers can't lie. It's all math. There's no emotional side of this. Do the numbers make sense? If yes, if there's profit, then pull the trigger. If the deal somewhat makes sense, maybe there's profit, maybe you're breaking even, then at that point, it's not even worth to flip the property. One of the greatest lessons that I've heard from an investor is that you don't make money when you sell the property. You actually make the money when you buy it. It's all in the buy. If you're buying at the wrong price, you've already lost. You've already lost the money. Instead, if you buy it at the right price, at a great discount from what the market value is, then you just give yourself enough margin in case whatever happens. If the market comes down, interest rates go up, you give yourself that cushion, that margin, just in case anything were to happen. You give yourself that room for error. And personally, when I run my numbers, I always like to run the worst case scenario, because trust me, it has happened and it will happen. Not just to you, but it happens to me all the time. We can only control what we can control. The project, the rehab, the materials that we put in, our contractors, the financing. What we can control is what the market does, how buyers react to the market. Maybe interest rates are going up. We can't control those things. So when running the numbers, you always want to go worst case to just have that peace of mind when going into this house flip. So I want to break down the simple math on this, and I don't want to overcomplicate it because I know it can seem very overwhelming with the different numbers and the different fees and costs. I want to make this very simple for you to really understand it. So the way you want to analyze a property, so there's actually two ways. One is actually a very quick and easy method. They call this the 70% rule or the 80% rule, depending on your market. So this rule basically says you take your ARV, which means after repair value, what you can actually sell it for, you take that number and you multiply it by 70%. From that number, you want to subtract the rehab cost. That will give you the price that you need to offer in order to make this deal work. Now, that is the quick and dirty method on how to analyze a property, but I often try to stay away from this 70%, 80% rule, just because sometimes it's very off and it doesn't allow me to tweak certain numbers that I know I have control over. So the way that I run the numbers and analyze a property, if it's a good flip, I take my ARV, once again, after repair value, From there, you want to subtract the purchase price. You also want to subtract the rehab costs. From there, subtract the acquisition costs. This is the cost when you purchase the property. Things like lender fees, points, title and escrow fees. It's usually going to be about 3% of the purchase price. From there, subtract holding costs. These are the costs that take place when you're actually doing the project. So from the point after you buy it to the point where you sell it, you have these holding costs. This can include things like the interest payments that you'll have monthly and also any utility bills. Maybe you're still paying for garbage, water, electricity. These are the holding costs. From there, you want to subtract the selling costs. This is the cost when you sell the property. This will include things like commissions to realtors, once again, title and escrow fees, and just the general closing costs. It's usually going to be about 5 to 6% of the total selling price. When it comes to commissions, maybe you work out a deal with your realtor where they get a lower commission percentage, but you still offer the buyer's agent a commission. After you subtract all these costs from the ARV, you'll get your gross profit. Now, most people get stuck on this gross profit. They see it's a very big number in most cases. But what most people often forget, and I was one of those people, you also have taxes to pay on the gains that you made. So from the gross profit, you want to subtract the taxes. Usually anywhere from 30 to 40%, just to be on the safe side. After you subtract that, then you'll get your net profit. I will be honest, in my case, I do have an advantage here because I'm both a realtor and the investor, but I always try to separate those two things. My commission is separate from my profit. So when I personally run the numbers on my flips, I still account for the commission that I'm gonna pay myself as the realtor selling the property. But it's definitely a sweet bonus because I not only get the profit, but I also get commission both on the buy side when I'm buying the property and also when I'm selling the property. So that's an added bonus of being a realtor. But that's not to say that you have to be a realtor in order to flip a house. You can still make great money just being the investor, and maybe working out a partnership with your realtor where if you do multiple projects during the year, maybe they can discount their commission because you're working with them strictly. The last thing I want to mention about running the numbers, your budget and your timeline. These are two things that you want to be very careful with. And like I mentioned before, always use the worst case scenario. With your budget, maybe the contractor might give you an estimate of the material costs, but in almost every single case, at least in my personal experience, I've always gone over budget. I don't know why. Every time I account for more, it still ends up going even higher than that. And as far as timeline, maybe the contractor might tell you it's 2 months, 3 months, 4 months of the actual work. But the reality of things is that sometimes things come up. In one of my most recent projects, we had to estimate about 2 months. Easy. Within the first 2 weeks, we had a plumbing issue. We basically had to gut out everything out of the bathrooms and replace the entire plumbing, brand new. So it ended up costing me about $5,000 more. But at the end of the day, I was actually comfortable with that because now the new buyer gets a completely brand new house with new plumbing. But of course, it did extend my timeline as well as increased my budget. So after you ran the numbers and the deal makes sense, there's profit to be made, now it's time to make the offer and lock up the deal. If you're buying this property off market, maybe you're doing it on your own and just working with a title company and escrow company, or if this is an on-market property, maybe you're working with your realtor, they'll help you and guide you throughout the entire transaction. So you got the offer accepted, now you're in contract, there's some prep work before the project actually begins. Once again, you can have your contractor walk the property with you just to finalize some numbers on their end as far as estimates of the work, the labor, and the material it's gonna take to make this happen. You also wanna start scheduling the day when your contractor can start officially. You don't wanna waste time. The day that you close and get the keys to your property, that is the same day you wanna start, if possible, of course. The second thing you wanna plan ahead is the materials. I had no idea that certain materials actually need to be ordered ahead of time. For example, if you're changing out the entire kitchen, things like the cabinets might be custom and you might have to pre-order those ahead of time. Those can take a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So instead of delaying your timeline, make sure you order that ahead of time to save you that stress and that headaches. Trust me, I am speaking from experience. You got everything in order, you get the keys to the property, and boom, you hit the ground running. Your contractors can finally get to work. One of the most important and crucial steps that many investors often forget is that you have to actually manage the project. Unless you want to pay somebody else that might have experience to manage the project, you want to be the one up front actually managing this for 2 reasons. 1, to make sure you're on top of your contractor, but 2, you also want to get the back-end experience. What actually goes into remodeling the place? I can't even begin to tell you how much I've learned from just watching my contractors and their guys do all the work, from changing windows, from changing plumbing, electricity. I've gained so much experience that now translates over to my real estate business when I help my personal clients buy and sell real estate. I now have new knowledge that I can pass on to them when they're buying their properties. They might ask me, what does it cost to remodel a bathroom? Now I have some experience, some knowledge, and can give them that information. But of course, you don't want to be there like every single day. You don't want to be those kind of investors that are just like helicopters, always being behind their backs and checking up on them. At times, you also want to give them their space. You want to give them that respect because they want to feel that you can trust them with this project. And because I've already set up those expectations up front, I know that they're going to do a great job without me having to always check up on them. But whenever I do want to get some feedback on how the project is going and if we're going to meet our timeline, of course, let's have a conversation. Always host at least least one weekly meeting with your contractor to make sure you're on time and on budget. The last thing when it comes to managing a project, you want to keep it very simple. One of the biggest mistakes that I made when I was flipping my first house, of course, I had seen so many pictures on Zillow and on Pinterest, all these colors and design trends that I wanted to put on my first flip. I wanted to go all out, all crazy. I kept forgetting that this wasn't going to be my house to live in. You have to remember that this is going to be a house that you're going to sell to a buyer that you have no idea what they like as far as colors and trends and design and aesthetics. So what I mean when I say keep it simple, keep the general feel and look of the property very neutral. You don't want to use some crazy colors like orange or green, colors that maybe not everyone likes. I personally like to use colors like grays, blacks, whites. These colors are very generic and neutral that might appeal to the vast majority of people, because at the end of the day, I want this property to sell. I want the end buyer to come in and say, I love this place. I want this property to be a beautiful blank canvas for them to come in and add their own personal touch. That is the goal with this property. Once your contractor has completed the project, now it's time to actually sell it. And when it comes time to listing the property, it's very important to present your property in the best possible light. Yes, of course the property is gonna look gorgeous from the work that you guys did, but I never like to cheap out when it comes time to presenting the property to the public. One of the things that I always do on all my flips is stage the property. Yes, you have nice clean walls and brand new cabinets, new kitchen, new bathrooms, but what does it feel like to actually live here? When the buyer comes in and they see an empty room, an empty living room, an empty kitchen, it's gonna make them feel a certain way. So I like to have my stagers come in and decorate the place. I want the buyer to come in and think, wow, this is gorgeous, and I can move in today if I wanted to. It is completely move-in ready. That is the feeling and confidence that you want to give the buyer. Remember this, the marketing is what sells the property. You want to get your property to be distributed everywhere, online, on social media platforms. Pricing the property, this is something that your realtor will walk you through. And hopefully they're a good one and will guide you the right way to properly pricing your property, to have it actually sell and not just sit on the market for weeks or months. And after you completed all this, you sold the property and you make your profit. Now it comes time to deciding whether you want to continue or if this is the last flip you ever do. In most cases, people think, wow, this is too much work, this is hard, this is stressful. I did it once, but never again. Then there's other people that completely fall in love with the process of transforming a place from this ugly, ugly house to this gorgeous, beautiful home. That is something that I've personally fallen in love with. Yes, of course, there is stress, there is work involved. If there's anything that you take away from this video, is that house flipping is very risky. There's things that are completely out of our control. The market turns, interest rates go up, buyers are freaked out. We cannot control that. And there might be times when we might actually break even or even lose money. But something that can actually protect you from those cases, if you can't sell the property that you flipped, you can always rent it out. But you have to work the numbers in when you're first running the numbers on the deal. The last thing I want to say is that this is a job. House flipping is a job. It requires work. Yes, there is great money and profit to be made, without a doubt. You can make some incredible money doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 flips per year, if that's the only thing you do. I hope this video inspires you to actually go out there and flip your first house, because it has absolutely changed my life. And I can promise you this, going out there and actually flipping your first house, you will learn so much more from actually doing it than what you got from this video, any podcast or book. I hope you go out there and crush it on your first deal. If you have any questions specifically to house flipping or investing in real estate, or even buying your first property ever, feel free to reach out to me anytime. You can always send me a DM on Instagram or leave a comment below and I'll make sure to respond to you. You get one life, so make it count. Peace.